So we just took a look at some basic ways of referencing cells. I want to talk to you now about something a little bit more advanced but very integral and very important in Excel, and that's the concept of absolute versus relative referencing of cells. Now, don't worry about it. It's a little bit, the jargon might be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to walk you through it and we can see how this actually comes into effect. So what we're looking at right now is still the same data. We've got our budget and we have totals for the various personal costs and operating costs. And what I'd like to do is I want to see, okay, how much is this amount relative to the amount that overall that was spent? So let's go ahead and scroll down and we'll note that in cell N32 we have a grand total of how much was spent. We'll make a mental note of that, N32, that's our total. And we will use that in a formula now. We'll say for this line, N3 divided by that total, N32, is going to give us what percentage of that total this expenditure is. Now, let's go ahead and replicate that. We'll replicate it down across just this section. And wait a second, now we have an error. We have a valid formula. What just caused this error that we have? Let's go ahead and take a look at the formula and see exactly what happened. Now, if I click on that formula, I can take a look at it over here, and we see that it's referencing cell N4. That's the appropriate amount. And we have a nice color coding, so let's go see what's marked in red. Let's go scroll down to N33. We have a nice little marker here indicating what was actually being calculated. What Excel did with the autofill is it assumed that, okay, I'm going to take the cell that's to the left of me and I'm going to take the cell that's down below me in N32, but I'm going to bump that up. I'm going to increment it to N33, which is now an empty cell. But what we actually wanted Excel to do is we wanted it to use N32 across all these calculations. In that case, that would be an absolute reference. It's a reference to a specific cell. It's absolute. It's not going to change. So how do we actually do that in Excel? Well, let's go back to our original formula, and let's lock that down now. By putting a $ in front of our cell, what I've just done here is I've locked it so that it's always going to reference the N column. And what I want to actually do is I want to lock it to row 32. So I want it to lock it to row 32. So now, as I replicate this formula across these rows, N32 is not going to change. Just to be precise and be completely correct, I'll remove this one because that's actually not necessary. And so now 32 is not going to change, and it's going to adjust the N3 and increment that to N4, etc. So now, oops, my mistake, sorry. I got to correct, I misclicked there. We'll put our dollar back in, we'll hit enter. Now we have our formula in. I'll double click the autofill handle. It replicated it downward. Let's take a look into one of those. We'll grab this one. It's properly referencing N5, and then it's kept N32 and not incremented to 32. Great. Okay, so now let's go ahead and we can take that same formula and we can use it here. We can go, this is, in this case, N10 divided by N32, and we'll go ahead. Now what's happened? We have a numerical representation of the data that isn't very useful. Let's go ahead and fix that and change that to a percentage. I can either select from here, you see percentage at the bottom, or the commonly used ones are also available as icons. I'll click on that. And I can autofill that as well. But once again, we're going to run into the same problem, so I'll put our dollar here. Double click on the autofill handle. And we have our percentages filled downward. Now that's fine, but there's actually an easier way to do it because personally I don't remember cell numbers and columns, letters, and all these types of things, especially when I'm dealing with numerous pieces of data within a very large spreadsheet. So let's revisit what we used before, which is the concept of names. Let's go ahead and select our total, and let's name it appropriately as total. Well, somewhat appropriately. You probably want to have something a little bit more explicit if you're actually to do this in your sheets because you'll want to use total over and over again. But nonetheless, in this case, we're going to use total. I'll hit enter, and now this cell is named total, so that when I create my formulas, just to prove that this is working, I'll delete these. I'll go here. I'll hit equal to indicate that I'm working in a formula. I'll take the current cell reference that I want, which is N10, and I'll divide it by total. We get the same result, and once again, we can autofill that downwards. So we can see it's very easy to enter formulas and reference cells, and we've learned that when you reference cells, you want to be careful about whether or not you want to reference that cell in an absolute manner, meaning you don't want it to change as the formula gets copied to elsewhere in the document, or if you want it to adjust so that it's like it will increment the rows and apply it appropriately across multiple pieces of data. So, absolute cells and relative cell references, why don't you go ahead and take a look at some of those.